All right, 4 games, 4 clashes. Let's get right into it. Port Adelaide hosts Geelong on Thursday night footy in a qualifying final, meaning the winner books a home prelim, big advantage, and the loser a home semi-final. They met once already this year, so round 9 at GMHBA Stadium, and Power came out like an absolute bull out of the gate. I think they scored 8 goals in the first term to sort of really put the game beyond doubt. And I know that Geelong ended up coming back and it was only a narrow win in the end, but the work was done early by the Power. Was there anything you'll sort of look at that game and go, yeah, this is kind of finals intensity, and we can take bits and pieces here that we can translate to how this might pan out on Thursday?
Take the finals thing out of it. I think the big thing that stood out for me on that night, and it's going to stand out for any team that plays against Port Adelaide, is taking away the corridor use for Port Adelaide. So on that night, as he said, 8 goals to 3. It was actually, 10 scoring shots to 6 at quarter time, so they had a fairly big lead. There was the 8 goals 2 to 3-3, so Geelong still put a little bit of score on the scoreboard. But you look at just percentage of disposals that Port Adelaide had in the corridor. So in Q1, they had 55% of their disposals in the corridor. If you just look at the midfield section, 53% of disposals were in the corridor of the midfield. Across the next 3 quarters, that dropped down to 38% of their disposals were in the corridor. If you just go to midfield, it's dropped from 53% to 43%. So again, they came out, played a perfect first quarter, but I think they showed their hand quite early, and their strength was get the ball back, go straight through the corridor and put Geelong's defence under pressure. Geelong forced them wide, started to win a little bit more contest in the last 3 quarters. So Geelong were plus 14 contested possession in the final 3 quarters, and Port were plus 45 in uncontested possessions. But that plus 45 was them sort of chipping it around, trying to get it back into the corridor, but Geelong taking it away. So it was almost good that the uncontested possession number rose so high for Port Adelaide, because then Geelong knew, okay, they're not going that fast attack like they were getting us on that first quarter, just 2-3 disposals, bang, goal. So, got to take the corridor away from Port Adelaide. And you look at across the years, so Port Adelaide, coming out of the back 50, they use the corridor 34% of the time, which is the highest of any team. 18% is the competition average. So they're almost doing it twice as much. So they just love the corridor. So the first thing for me is, how does Geelong defend Port's ball movement?
So the midfield of Geelong has a big ask against the midfield of Port Adelaide.
Massive ask, and I think Port has 4 of the best 5 midfielders playing in this game. I think the only midfielder that would come, so if you've got Rosie, Butters, Horn, Francis and Wines, who's had a fantastic second half of the year. The only one I think you can probably slot somewhere in there is Dangerfield. Who else?
Max Holmes, maybe?
No.
He's sort of not really.
Yes.
Not real midfield, yeah.
So Port Adelaide is such an advantage. It's very rare we see such a discrepancy like that.
And they're quick. They hit the ball with pace. They're set up around stoppages. They're
very dynamic, and they complement each other really well. Like I said, I think I was surprised with what Wines has been able to do in the second half of the year. I think what the form he's rediscovered, it's not quite at the level that it was when he won the Brownlow a couple of years ago, but it's just adds another dynamic to that midfield, and it allows the other guys to do what they do on the outside. And the way he plays, as we mentioned, it's so suited to that contest, getting first hands on the ball in finals. So I think Port Adelaide is going to have just a massive advantage in the midfield. And I think I've been saying this for a week now. I don't think this game's going to be close. I really think Port's going to have this done by 3/4 time.
Any reason for Geelong fans to kind of think, well, no, we can definitely take it up to this team and potentially knock them off?
So the one thing with Geelong that you look at in a lot of their games this year is they've really been a high counter-attack team. So we probably spoke about their midfield. They're not backing themselves to win a lot of contested possessions and clearances and getting first use of the ball. A lot of it has been concede a fair few inside 50s to the opposition and go end-to-end and score. So we know that they are the best team for if you generate an inside 50 from your defensive 50, from a chain in your defensive, they're the only team that scores from 50% of their inside 50. So if they can go end-to-end and get an open forward line, they're going to score more than 1 in 2 times, the number 1 team at it. So it's that rollback game. You look at Port Adelaide, they do dominate territory and things like that, and it's not something you want to sort of plan for or anything for Geelong, but the thing that gives Geelong a chance is Port Adelaide's accuracy has actually been horrible, and the way that Geelong can actually manufacture scores from the back 50 could actually play into their hands. So Port Adelaide this year, they've had at least 21 shots at goal in every game this season. They're the only team to have at least 20 in every game.
So if it comes together for them,
yeah,
right?
but you break it down and they've kicked the 10th most goals of any team this year and the most behinds of any side. So second for shots at goal, number one for marks inside 50, but 18th for shot accuracy. So,
But as we've said, though, the accuracy can flip from week to week. I know that's that's the year sample size.
One of the things that Port does this year, or this year in particular, is their inside 50s aren't overly deep either.
Yeah,
so
so
they
they-
are taking shots from further out.
yeah, so they take the most marks between 30 to 50 metres, what we call sort of a shallow zone. They take the most marks in that zone and have the most shots from that zone. So they are taking the harder mark shots. But again, I think that just sort of, if Geelong can sort of, again, you're not going to plan for it, but it's going to be more of a counter-attack scoring game for Geelong if they are going to win.
Do
They're
shallow
gonna have to score
entries
from the
work
back up.
into Geelong's favour, or will they prefer to have the deeper
I
ones
reckon
that
they
go
prefer to make you go long,
Yeah.
but the thing with Geelong's back six is that's the key to success for Geelong has been how their back six has performed this year. So you look at scores per inside 50 when they've won, they've conceded a score 38% of the time. When they've lost, they've conceded a score 52% of the time. And the inside 50 number sort of goes up a little bit. The marks inside 50, they concede 5 more when they lose compared to they win. So Geelong's defence is very good at figuring it out. And, if they know that Port Adelaide's going to go shallow or not, they're probably going to chop you off there. And it's probably easy to sort of counter-attack from a shallow entry because you're starting 40 metres out from the opposition goal rather than 10 metres out. But that's where I put faith in Geelong, knowing that, okay, Port Adelaide are shallow entries. Geelong are going to know that. They're going to probably set up for it. But Geelong are going to probably play from, as I said, a more counter-attack team rather than trying to blast 10 goals from centre bounce clearances or something like that, because that just hasn't been Geelong's sort of MO for the whole year.
Really quickly, before we move on to the next game, I guess Geelong's form versus top 8 teams versus bottom 10 teams, and then Port against top 8 teams versus bottom 10 teams. Is there anything there that you look at and you go, there's something that both teams can kind of exploit from their opposition?
Yeah, so something I looked at this year for every team, we'll do it game by game, of, just top 8's form compared to when you played the bottom 10. So for Geelong, it's what I'm talking about with the points from clearances. 10th for points from clearances when they've come up against top 8 teams, number 1 against the bottom 10. So they've done well against the lower sides, but they know when they're coming up against Brisbane, Port Adelaide, the stronger midfields, we probably have to concede a little bit in there and get behind the ball to counter-attack. Contested possession goes a similar way there. They're 17th against the top 8, so second worst contested possession differential against top 8 teams, but 8th against the bottom 10 and just in the positive. So it really is, it's the inside clearance stuff that Geelong is probably going to struggle in across the final series. But as I said, Geelong have identified that all year and sort of played a game style to protect that.
I think Port is the most likely team right now, spoiler alert for tomorrow, to be playing in the grand final. I really think that they are. Obviously, they've got the home qualifying final. I think they're the most likely team of the 4 teams playing in the qualifying final to win. I don't think that's crazy to say. Most people probably agree with that. The odds certainly do, which would mean they're hosting a preliminary final, and they're probably going to be favoured in that to make the grand final. The other thing with Port is I think we've not been focusing on, because we look at Hawthorn and the Dogs as, they're in form. The power of 1-8 of their last 9 games as well. They're flying under the radar.
I said it last week.
Yeah,
no love.
I think Port Adelaide is really set up, and this is their best opportunity to win a premiership in the Ken Hinkley era.
And just going back to the top 8 versus bottom 10 stuff, Port Adelaide and Brisbane actually are the 2 most interesting teams for me when I did this exercise, in that they both got better against top 8 opposition this year than they were against bottom 10. Sort of made me take a look back and think Brisbane and Port are probably the 2 that are the most experienced out of all the finalists that are left. I've only looked at finalists and their how they went versus top 8 versus bottom 10. Port Adelaide and Brisbane sort of, want to put it in very simplistic terms, probably realise that, okay, we've got to go helter-skelter against the top 8 teams and bring our best form against top 8 teams. So a lot of their numbers are actually better when they played the top 8 teams, but they almost took a week off or rested against bottom 10 teams and just cruised through. Again, it sounds like a funny way to put it, but we've spoken a million times about how coaches are trying to manage a season and you can't be at your 100% for it's a 24, 25-week season now. You can't do it every single game. So looking at Port Adelaide, Brisbane, it seems to be they really get switched on for the top 8 teams. But a lot of their numbers are sort of dropped against bottom 10 teams.
Just quickly, tell me if there's anything interesting in this or whether it's just throw it out completely. Geelong has played only one of their last 5 games has been a night game. Port, 5 of their last 6 have been night games.
Yeah? When did Hawthorn last play a night game?
I have to check that.
Check that one as well.
Do you think there's anything in that?
Well, the loser of this game will play the winner of the next match, which is Friday night. In terms of form teams clashing, like we said off the top, this is about the pick of the bunch because you've got the Dogs and Hawthorn. Since round 11, third on the ladder versus first on the ladder. In terms of the run-in, they've both been really, really good. They met in round 8, both when they were out of form, is probably how I would put it. Marble Stadium. The Hawks got the better of the Dogs. Don't know if you can take much from that, but they've obviously transformed into completely different sides since that early part of the year.
They have, but on that night in round 8, they both sort of stuck to their strengths that they sort of have, on each other this year. So Bulldogs are probably a better clearance team than Hawthorn have been this year, and Hawthorn have been a better turnover team. On the night, round 8 at Marvel, Bulldogs scored 11 goals 2, 68 points from clearances to the Hawks 3 goals 5. So 45 points ahead from points from clearances for the Bulldogs, but then flipping it into turnover, which got the result done. Bulldogs kicked 2 goals 4, 16 from turnover compared to the Hawks 10, 8, 68. So Libba, Treloar, Bont, they're going to win you the inside ball and get it, but the Hawks are spreading and winning that ground ball
Which is what they've
contest
done well
outside of post-clearance ground ball and just swooping on it from there.
Where do you see this one?
Well, I'll give you the answer to the question you posed before. Good pickup as well. They played one night game all year, the Hawks, and it was against the Suns of all teams, round 5. They lost that by 53 points.
Interesting.
So maybe that's even more. You're more onto something there than me. This is the game I'm looking forward to most. Obviously, can't wait to see Carlton play, but this one should be an absolute cracker. And like we said off the top, you can make very, very strong cases for both these sides. Not just winning this game, but going deep in September. What's the question?
Well, what's your vibe? How are you thinking this is going to be won? Do you go with maybe more finals experience? Do you go with the energy that Hawthorn have had in the back half of the season continuing? I'm worried about the bye effect. A team that has just rode an incredible wave of fan support, emotion, momentum, and energy. And then all of a sudden they've got to stop and they've got to try and rev themselves back up. That's my concern for a young side in particular.
So that's something I spoke about maybe with you a couple of weeks ago. It's not just the bye that's halted the momentum. It's the fact that the 2 games to end the season were against North Melbourne, a 124-point win, and against Richmond, 63-point win. 2 games, the 2 worst teams in the comp. The game before that was against Carlton, that game when that was over.
At 18 on the bench.
So that was a 74. And then the game before that was the Giants' 2-point loss. So I'm giving them all the credit in the world for the 3 wins they've got, but they haven't really been tested in about 4 or 5 weeks now. So that's a concern. It has to be. The Bulldog. Then look at the Bulldogs forward line. Can that 3-pronged key forward, attack? Is that something the Hawks can deal with? Is that going to be the difference?
If it
We're going to
rains,
get
is that
rain.
gonna be-
Exactly.
yeah.
We're going to get rain. Is how much of an advantage is that? Is that an advantage for Hawthorn or is it an advantage for the Dogs?
Just back on so I think Hawthorn have come out the social media stuff, that hawk ball that they're presenting and rolling with, and sort of a branding, and it's all around. And we talk about Hawthorn, exciting ball movement, fast and pure crisp ball movement and flinging it around, making the ground wide. But defensively, they've been great. So we talk about defences win premierships. So Hawthorn at the moment, number 1 for opposition points scored from defensive half. So teams cannot go end to end and score against them. Conceded the 3rd fewest inside 50s of any team. So they're not putting their back 6 under much pressure. Number 1 for defending one-on-ones. So we talk about a lack of a true key defender. Scrimshaw, Sicily, get them one-on-one and they'll do their job fine. Second hardest team to score against from defensive half, but sort of, as I said, not just defensive 50, but defensive half in total. And since round 11, they're number 1 for points against. They conceded the fewest. So I sort of wanted to give Hawks a bit of love because I think everyone is looking at the Bulldogs going, well, I think the Bulldogs, scoring and offense will be too good for the Hawks' defense. Hawks have built this form since round 11 has been built off the back of defense because we knew what they were doing with the ball. In the first 5-6 rounds, they were doing almost similar thing with the ball and losing every game. They've shored up the defence and gone the other way.
And potentially some weather involved. And you talk about accuracy like Port Adelaide, and we were just mentioning that. Since that round 11 mark, the Dogs are 16th in the league for accuracy. So
accurate, yeah. That's it.
Goals per inside 50, that's 12th.
It's all fair and valid data, but accuracy is one that I almost throw out because most things you don't go from the worst clearance team to the best one game to the next, but accuracy you can. You can go from the worst 1 week to the best the following week.
Yes, but this is a
Yeah,
trend.
but I think it's hard. So the trend from round 11 onwards is their 12th for accuracy. So they might have one out of the box this week. So if you're tipping for one game, I can see your point of view.
Yeah,
but
that's my
I
point.
would still be looking at across the finals. They're not going to be.
They're going to be one of the
inaccurate teams. Yeah.
Christian, you spoke at the start about their end to the season and the 5 10-goal wins. It's not just that. They've had 14 wins this year. 8 of them have been by 45-plus points. That's extraordinary. I think we probably should be tipping as well. We probably should be giving our tips.
We're going to do that later.
We're going to do it at the end. We're going to go back and do them. Okay, I thought we were going to do one at a time. My apologies.
We've got a sponsored segment we need to get to.
Right. But I think if you said to me the margin in this game is 53 points, who do you think wins it? I think it's only Hawthorn.
I think it's smashing, and that's why I look at. It's really going to be interesting the first 5 minutes to me, and I'm hopefully it doesn't rain too much because the rain's probably going to force them to play only one way anyway, which is long down the line. But with the Hawks, you think about a young team coming in, and could they get nervous and tighten up in finals? Spoke about how good they are defensively, but we know when they get the ball, they love to go wide, fast, and just chip it around, make the ground as wide as possible. The first 5 or 10 minutes will be interesting to me. If they don't look like they're ready to take the game on and they're trying to sort of chip it around and be conservative, I'll be very, very worried for Hawthorn in terms of this is not how you got to the finals. Don't change your way to go, okay, in the finals, we can't expose ourselves by trying to go helter-skelter. It's like, you can. That's how you got there. Please continue to play that way.
I think that's where Sam Mitchell is such an asset, because I think he obviously knows that, and I think he will be reminding of, this is what has got us in this position. If we change now, we're screwed.
This is just another 120 minutes of football.
There's instructing it, but then it's players walking out in front of 94,000 and the cauldron atmosphere and finals, and it's an elimination final on the line. Like, you can obviously instruct it, but it is up to the players to, I guess, take that moment.
But it's not as if the Bulldogs they've had deep runs year after year. There are a lot of players that will run out there for the Bulldogs who have very little finals experience as well.
I'll make the big call that if the Hawks have 5 backwards kicks in the first 15 minutes, they're no chance of winning the game.
There you go. Top 8 and then versus bottom 10. Anything really notable for these two teams before we move on?
Hawks probably similar to Geelong out of the stoppages. So 13th for points from stoppages against top 8, but 2nd from bottom 10. But as I spoke about, their overall strength has been from turnover anyway. And they're first for points from turnover against bottom 10, 10th against against the top 8.
Is that a worry then, that they're not able to do it against better opposition?
Yeah, a little bit in terms of flipping those two. As I said, the recent form, I think, because Carlton's a top 8 team, they've smashed them by 80 points, and I think it was either Giants or Port Adelaide game in one of the score sources, they completely own that game as well. So they've proven that they can do it. And for the Bulldogs, it's probably the way they move the ball. So 14th for going from defensive midfield to inside 50 against top 8, but number 1 against bottom 10. And 4th for uncontested marks when they play against the bottom 10, and 16th for uncontested marks per game against the top 8. So that ability to move it from centre half back and chip hasn't been as strong against top 8 teams. The weather probably sort of takes that stat out of it for them this week.
Interesting.
Last question on that, quick, just gut feel. Is this the best elimination final ever?
Ever?
Oh,
I'd have to have the list in front of me. I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, this is the most exciting final of the round.
But I'd have to fact check myself.
Fancy.
Saturday Arvo is the 4th Sydney Derby in finals. Would you believe it? Crazy to think that, because there hasn't been a Western Derby final, and there's only been one showdown final in the entire history.
There has been, okay.
There's already been 3 Sydney Derbies. Isn't that crazy?
Yep. And they've all gone the way of the Giants. So Sydney host GWS at the SCG, Saturday afternoon football. Swans won both clashes throughout the year, so there is form there for Sydney. But very much while the Swans were in their hot patch of form before round 15, and then they kind of, after that, it sort of started to get a bit tough for them. How do you kind of see this one playing out? Well, this is I don't know how you guys feel, but this is the one for me that I don't know. I think this is as close to a coin flip as you can possibly get, and we'll do our tips later. I think I'm pretty confident on the other 3 teams that I'm going to pick. This one, I've got no idea. I think you can make very strong cases, and both have had periods where they've looked like, I know you didn't say the Giants at any point weren't one of those 3 teams that were the best, But I think in the early stage of the season, they felt very much neck and neck with Sydney. They've had a very similar season in terms of where they've been, how they've fallen off, the questions that we've had of them, and what they can do in finals. The query I have about Sydney is the back end of the year with that five losses in 6 games. And then obviously they won the 3 to finish the year, but are they rolling again? Because I know they've won 3 games, but I'm not sure if they're playing anywhere near like they were when they were hitting their straps in that middle part of the year.
So the 3 games, does that include the Gold Coast game as well? So it definitely includes...
No, the last 3 games of the season, Collingwood, Essendon and Adelaide. They won those 3.
Oh, sorry, Sydney. I think you're talking about GWS still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that followed that five losses in 6 game stretch where everyone was saying what is going on with this team.
Yeah.
Because we spoke about what they were doing well, and then when it sort of got, it was almost about how they'd peaked too soon. They showed their hand of what made them so good, and everyone had time to figure it out.
And talking about showing their hand, I reckon it was the turnover game that I've identified that clubs really went to work from. So round 0 to 11, they were outscoring the opposition 24 points per game from turnover, the best team in it. Since round 12 onwards, they're negative 3 points per game. So they're actually getting outscored from turnover. Second half of the year, this is Sydney. Their ability to turn their own turnover into a score, they did so 23% of the time, which was number 1. They sort of dropped down to 21.5%, which is 5th best. So their ability to score from turnover is still pretty good because once you get the ball in your hand, you still can control a lot of the game and it's hard to defend that. It's what the opposition does when they get the ball. So Sydney when they turned it over, they were getting scored against 17% of the time, round 0 to 11. Reckon teams have been able to work that out. It's jumped up by 3%, so they're up 20.6%, which is now 14th. So
they've slipped 10 places.
So they've become the 4th hardest to score from turnover, to the 5th easiest to score from turnover. Reckon that's teams exactly just picking the eyes out of them, looking at how they set up. We talked about it
throughout the year. So the Swans love to play the helter-skelter going forward, but teams have been successful in really slowing it down and, as you say, picking the eyes out.
And then the high marks that we've been banging on about when St Kilda and Bulldogs beat them, it's just chip it through Sydney's zone.
And is that how the Giants have had success? I know that some of these finals date back a while ago now, but how have the Giants had success in beating Sydney in the 3 finals?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the previous 2 before the last one, but it's probably it's contest and clearance and pressure where Giants sort of have the edge in finals. But you look at the 2 times they've played this year, and the Giants won the contested possessions in both games, won the clearances in both games, and the Giants won the uncontested possession count. So the Giants do have to step up and just get their hands to the ball first. But yeah, you talk about Sydney and their sort of end to the season. I think GWS is similar. I know you spoke about them sort of being on par at times with Sydney as being the best team in it, but I know the Giants, 2 of their final wins of the season, or 2 of the 4 final wins of the season, one was against Gold Coast up there, and the other one was against Brisbane. Both of those games, I think they had 10 fewer scoring shots than their opposition, but 1. So I've actually looked across the whole year and looked at all the finalists and how many more shots they had at goal than their opposition. So this includes complete misses. So how many times were you having a ping at the goals compared to your opposition? Bulldogs number 1 in the comp, plus 160 more shots at goal than their opposition. Port Adelaide second, plus 154.
So the 2 teams that aren't as accurate as others as well.
Yeah, so they're just taking the pot shots, but still, if you're finishing 154 more shots than your opposition at Port Adelaide, you know you're controlling it. Brisbane are plus 141, so every finalist is in the positive. Carlton is sort of plus 20, which is 9th in the competition. They're the 2nd worst of any finalists. GWS have had 31 fewer shots at goal than their opposition have had this year, which puts them at 13th. So there's been a lot of luck for GWS this year in terms of
their opposition's accuracy.
Yeah, their opposition is inaccurate. And the Giants
is that them defensively pushing them to bad areas? I mean,
I think so. So the numbers I've got here. So you look at GWS and the key measures. They're 7th for points for, 9th for points against, 9th for points from turnover differential, 7th from points from clearance differential, 8th for contested possession differential, mid.
Mid.
And then it just sort of jumps up to pressure applied, number 1.
Yeah.
Accuracy against, number 1. Accuracy for, 2nd. So they're also doing it at their end. But again, it's just making football hard for the opposition. So I spoke about Sydney probably haven't dropped off as much from their ability to actually have the ball and score from it. That's where the Giants' strength are, those, is when the opposition gets the ball, let's make it really, really hard for them. Let's turn them into a mistake, and we'll just see what we can do off that. The one thing that I look at for the Giants is, what is your number 1 strength this year? Pressure. I don't know if you can build up a winning final
From being
just
number
from
one.
being number one at pressure. You need to be able to do something with the ball.
From a Giants point of view, who is the player you want to stop on? I mean, you want to stop them all, but Warner, Heaney, Goulden. Who is the one that you're putting the most attention into?
Well, Goulden's the one that's torched them twice this year.
Yeah, so 70 disposals against him in the 2 games, so 29 and 41 in the 2 games. As I said, Sydney have won the contested possessions in both, so that's the Warner and Heaney doing it. Giants have won the uncontested possessions, but I think Sydney have had the most valuable outside or uncontested possession winner in Goulden. I think he's the one I'm sitting someone on. It seems to be easier to tag an outside player, just get someone to run up and down on the wing for him. But it's the pressure stuff. You know that you're going to be around the contest, especially team-wise. You're going to be great putting pressure on. It's just we don't want Sydney to get easy outside ball. Goulden's one of their best at getting that.
Just the mental aspect. So we did talk about that 0-3 finals record for the Swans against the Giants in finals. The Swans are 18-7 in home and away. So there's a massive disconnect there.
Yeah.
The Swans have also won 5 of the past 6. They're the number 1 seed going into it. There's a lot of pressure on them to win. Is there a mental aspect as well?
I think there is definitely I think even more so because it is its own rivalry. Whatever we want to look at it, however we want to look at it as a rivalry, it is a rivalry, the Giants and the Swans. If it was pick any two, Hawthorn and Freo, any 2 teams, it wouldn't have the same amount of because I think it's spoken about more because of it in the lead up to these games and that sort of stuff. I think there's definitely a mental part, especially because of how well they play them in the home and away season. I think they'd won 5 of their last 6 in the home and away, or 6 of the last 7, or something like that. But haven't beaten them in a final, and the players know that. Even if you're a player that wasn't involved in the first 2. You're still aware of it, and you're still, you know the trend. I think it's definitely a concern.
Looking forward to that one. I mean, these are all 4 great finals. I mean, I think we've got a column coming out from Rowan Connolly on Thursday, sort of a remember when, looking back at 1994. So 30 years ago, and the first week of finals then, and there were 4 crackers. These could be 4 crackers as well. So check that out on the website.
The probability says there'll be one shocker, though.
Yeah, probably.
At least.
Finally, some deja vu from last season. Brisbane and Carlton meeting at the Gabba. So it's the 3rd time they've met there in 12 months. They haven't met since opening round. A thriller kind of that had it all in the end. So the Lions leapt out to a 46-point lead before the Blues reeled them in and won by a single point, and kind of kick-started Carlton's season, and then Lions kind of had that really poor start and have been able to recover but couldn't quite get the top 4 finish. But geez, things are different this time around for the elimination final. The Blues have been injury hit and they're hoping to make maybe 6 changes.
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
The Lions choked away a top 4 finish. There's a lot on the line here, and as a team that has been under pressure to perform and win a grand final, the Lions really, really, really need to salute here.
They do, but if Brisbane, let's throw it forward a bit. If Brisbane beat Carlton and because then they're on the road for 3 finals after that. It's going to be very tough, very, very tough to win it, to make it, let alone win it. Let's say they beat Carlton, they win a semi, and then they lose in a prelim. Are we going to then look at that and say, Brisbane failed again? I think they get cut a bit more slack this year, whether right or wrong, because of how hard the path is going to be. Very different to...
The path was in their own hands.
Yeah, I think that's
understand
part of the failure is not getting to top 4 is part of the failure of the season. Yeah.
The last month of the year, it was right there for the taking.
Yeah, so we'll focus on this game. I think the biggest question is, what do Carlton do? I think that's the biggest variable. How many changes is too many? Are we going to see 3, 4, 5, 6? Someone was saying there might be 8 changes. Obviously, you want as much quality in the team as you can get, but
what's the tipping point?
What's the balance? And I don't know. Perhaps we should have looked at this. Have you guys ever done what's too many changes to a team?
We haven't, but I'm just thinking the same thing. We could probably run the query. Ross Lyon, and the reason why we have a pre final
Ross,
was Ross Lyon probably did make 9 changes one year and win.
I think it was about
Chris
11 changes or something.
So it's gonna throw it out that usually when you have mass changes coming into a finals because you've just rested a whole bunch of players, not because you've had actual players like Carlton who have missed 2 or 3 weeks. But you're right. I don't think they can win this week, but if they do win this week, it just gets harder and harder. Every single game Carlton plays is harder and harder. To bring back 6 guys from injury and have them back up week after week.
Harder because it's harder to back up, or because the opposition gets harder?
No, both. But for Carlton's point of view, it's just surely if you're bringing 6 players, they're not going to last for 4. You might be able to get the best out of them week 1, but they're just going to be more tired and more banged up week after week. So I think it's almost an impossible task for Carlton to get anywhere near the grand final, just because of the amount of injuries that are coming back.
Yeah. So how many do you think is a fair enough number?
It's not a number. I think it's the players. I think it's the names.
Okay.
I think if you can say you can get Curnow in, you can get Mackay in, you can get De Koning in, you can get Chera in, and you can get McGovern in.
There's 5.
I think that's, I'll bring him in. Sam Doherty?
So you're prepared to make 5. But what's in between 5 v 6? Is 6 all of a sudden you fall off a cliff? 6, oh my God, we made too many changes.
So who's going out? It's probably someone like Jackson Binns.
Yep.
Ashton Moyer.
Yep.
I think these are pretty easy yeses, right?
Well, that's my point. It's just like, I think when you look at if you got 7 players like, okay.
Adam Chera or Jack Carroll.
Exactly. We have 7 players that are fit to go. We know the 7 that will come out. But to the point, are we going to get to halfway through the third quarter and these guys just run out of legs? Which is a possibility. But I don't know. I think the upside is obviously a lot higher. Look, this team lost to St Kilda. I know St Kilda ended the season well, but St Kilda's nowhere near a finalist. Carlton's got to make as many changes as it possibly can to strengthen its team and give itself as great a chance as it possibly can to go on a run in finals. I think that's the thing. It's high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
There's no point. What's the point in saying, we'll give
no
Tom De Koning another week?
Yeah.
If it fails,
do or die.
If it fails, it fails. Then they're out anyway. They come back next year. I think you make the team as strong as possible. And like I said earlier, we know that Carlton, when they were fit and healthy in the middle part of the season, after they beat Richmond in round 16, I think it was, by 10 goals at the G.
Clear.
They were second on the ladder, 11-4. So it all fell apart from that point on, and injuries aren't an excuse, but they're a reason. They're a reason why teams fall apart. And I think if they're able to get 5, 6 players back, I think Carlton is a chance of upsetting Brisbane. I really do.
Anything statistically that you want to bring to the table?
Final. Again, Carlton. Injuries don't help, but the form at the end of the season. So 2-6, they finished the season as, obviously with injuries. But looking at other finalists that have made it in there with such a poor form, so we spoke about the runway for a few weeks here. North Melbourne in 2016, they had a 2-6 record coming into the finals, lost the elimination final by 62 points to Adelaide. West Coast in 99 came in with a record of 1-7. They won their first final by 5 points, but lost their semi-final by 54 points to Carlton. So
I know all these. Yep. I know they're all going to suggest. It's like we were looking at the teams that finished 8th before, and they all suggest that you're no chance. But how many teams in this position are in a position where they can bring in so much quality?
That's one thing.
They're not a true 8th team, is my point.
And I don't know, and again, this is worth studying, how much does that quality, you're bringing in that quality, how much do they actually perform better in week 1 or worse in week 1 than they do in week? Maybe it's gone the other way. Maybe it takes a 2-week build-up to actually get your form back, and we're not going to see that. So it's a lot of unknowns. But game style-wise, when you watch these two teams that have played previously, I won't go through all the numbers quickly. Carlton, if they can force Brisbane to handball the ball, Carlton are a great chance. If Brisbane can start kicking it out and getting uncontested marks, both the prelim and round 0, the stages that Carlton dominated the games in was where Brisbane was almost a 1 kick to 1 hand, so 46 kicks, 44 handballs, just trying to work it out of pressure. Carlton's pressure was right on them. The periods in both of those games where Brisbane has sort of put the foot down and beaten Carlton, it's been 100 kicks to 30 handballs and a whole lot of marks. So Carlton's got to keep it in tight, got to keep the pressure factor up, and got to keep the kick to handball ratio
low. Can they do that for
low.
4 quarters? I don't think they can.
Who knows? There's a player.
They might only need to do it for 2.
Maybe. There's a player that is likely going to play in this game that I think is under more pressure than any other player in finals. And I don't think it's close. I don't even know who would be second if I was ranking them, but I think first is so clear cut. And it's Charlie Curnow. So, 2-time Coleman medalist, as we know. Maybe he fell apart a little bit in the back end of the year, missed a couple of games, but maybe could have been 3 in a row. We spoke about all year, could easily be 3 in a row, which doesn't happen at all very often. He's had 1 final series last year and was very poor throughout. He kicked a goal in each of the 3 games, was well beaten across all 3 games.
And it was noticed.
Sorry?
And it was noticed.
It was, and it was spoken about, it was noticed, and it was very disappointing for a player that had played so high throughout the season. And then all of a sudden we started diving into the numbers a bit more about how Charlie goes against the top 8 sides versus the bottom 10 sides. And I think it was about 2/3 of his goals have come against the bottom 10 sides. I know you get 19 of the goals last year came against the Eagles. So I think there's a huge amount of pressure on him to perform this year because if Carlton's only got one shot now, if the Blues lose to Brisbane and Charlie plays poorly, I think he's going to be under massive scrutiny in the off-season coming back for 2025 because we know how good he is, but people are going to just, whether fair or not, and probably would be fair, people are going to say he is not a big game performer. And I think the numbers would back it up. And the problem with Charlie is he's coming back from injury, and I think you can kind of look at it in one way and say, well, that might be an excuse as to why. But I think in time we won't look at the injury. We'll look at the numbers and say, Charlie Curnow, he played 4 finals and he kicked 3 goals.
So one of the numbers I looked at just quickly is so last year his home and away one-on-one winning record. He won 31% of his one-on-ones. In the finals, he won 1 of his 12 one-on-ones, which is 8% win rate. So you can talk about maybe his role changed, but it was like when the ball was kicked to him and it was him versus his defender, he was not as good as he was for the rest of the season. So.
And I don't know why. I don't know why that is. He just didn't look comfortable.
Super quickly before we move on, anything for top 8 versus top 8 versus bottom 10?
As I said, Brisbane similar to Port, so 14th for scoring. For Oppo scoring per inside 50 against bottom teams. So bottom 10 teams actually scored really well against Brisbane's defence. They were the 5th easiest team if you were a bottom 10. But they're the 5th hardest for the top 8 teams. So their defence really did tighten up against top 8 teams.
They pick and choose when they want to play.
Almost, yeah. Post-clearance contested possessions, they're number 1. So winning general play contested possessions against the top 8 teams. 7th and in the negative against the bottom 10. So there's a few numbers similar to Port Adelaide where it was Brisbane were like, okay, we've got some serious opposition here. Let's go out and play seriously. But it might have, again, whether early in the season, whether they were taking things a little bit too easy and now have missed top 4, who knows? So
Interesting. All right, it's time to put our tips in for the week. Grab your Footy Tips app and play along if you want, because Celebrations will be taking over ESPN Footy Tips over the next 4 weeks as we put our tippers' tastes to the test each week. So that fast 4 times in a row. Keep an eye out for some key matchups of all your favourite drinks, all thanks to Celebrations. Good shout. Over 18s only and drink responsibly. Jake, who have you got this weekend?
I'm gonna get. Well, do you want me to go through all
Yes,
4? Or are we
please.
going to go game by game?
We're going to hustle along.
I'm going to go Port Adelaide comfortably 40 plus.
40 plus.
Hawthorn, GWS, and Carlton.
Any margins on those last 3?
Hawthorn, I think Hawthorn's a tough one. I'll go Hawthorn by 20 points, Giants by 5, and Carlton by 9.
Port by 16, Bulldogs by 9, Sydney by 11, just based on they haven't beaten Giants in a final yet, so I always tip for it to happen the first time, and Brisbane by 27 to be my blowout.
Yeah, that's closer to what I'm thinking. I think Port Adelaide comfortably-ish. I think the Bulldogs get the job done over the Hawks. I think the Swans are okay and will get the job done over the Giants, and Brisbane will be too strong for Carlton. That is just my thoughts.